It does take over your life. There are times when you go to bed at night and then you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and the events of the day are going through your mind.
It took 18 months of my life. I'll never forget these children's faces.
Not everybody is able to live with the fact that they're investigating the deaths of children.
This little lad at some stage stopped breathing, went blue, back arched, he collapsed, had a heart attack. It's horrendous for a police officer's point of view that someone could go on there and do all this. So for a parent and members of the public, I mean, it's just devastating, unbelievable.
It was the first time ever that there'd been murders or suspected murders in a hospital environment.
It was shocking news, unbelievable, and it took quite some time for us to overcome that thought that one amongst us, who we were working with entirely on trust, was a criminal.
I find it traumatic. It's not until you sit back and look at what it is that you've investigated that you're able to say, well, yeah, that was pretty gruesome. There was a lot of pressure. I was fearful at one stage of losing my job as the detective superintendent. But nevertheless, I decided that I couldn't live with myself without following it through. On the 30th of April of 1991, I received a telephone call from a detective sergeant at Grantham. He told me that there had been an allegation made that there were possible murders at Grantham Hospital.
In the 2 months leading up to the phone call, Grantham Hospital's children's ward, known as Ward 4, had suffered 4 infant deaths and the highest number of collapses in babies and children the hospital had ever seen.
When this was first reported to me, a sheer panic sets in because you think, you know, I've got this investigation to conduct and I have no medical knowledge. I don't even know what a nursing note or a doctor's note looks like. I visited the hospital the next day, got a very brief synopsis of the allegation. I arranged at that time to set up a meeting on the Friday of that week, and I asked the Regional Health Authority for expert help. So the meeting was held at Grantham Hospital. Significantly at the meeting, there were 2 consultant paediatricians who both worked on Ward 4, which was the children's ward at Grantham Hospital.
Just 1 week earlier, those 2 hospital consultants had written a letter expressing their concern over the high number of deaths, collapses and staff shortages on Ward 4.
When we met Superintendent Clifton, he did ask, "Doctor, do you have any suspicions?" So I said I had several collapses which I was very concerned with. The staff is concerned with because these are very unusual. I, however, have no specific concerns that these are beyond medical reasons. But I still need to know whether there is any. Partly because as clinicians, we believe we can always find a cause for it, for any illness, especially a serious illness.
The children who died were Liam Taylor, Timothy Hardwick, Becky Phillips and Claire Peck. Their post-mortem stated that all 4 had died from natural causes.
My colleague, however, expressed his concerns that it is possible that there may be an outsider, but he couldn't specifically say whether it's a doctor or a nurse. So at that time, we discussed at length, and Superintendent Clifton felt it is worth getting an independent opinion about all the collapses.
Dr. David Hull, the nominated expert, he was at that time the national chair of the Paediatric Society, and he agreed to take away the files of 13 children whose collapses and deaths were considered suspicious.
While Dr. Hull reviewed the cases, Stuart put together a team of homicide detectives to investigate at the hospital.
Stuart approached us and asked us to go to the hospital, and I, with other officers, went there onto Ward 4, spoke to basically the medical staff that were on duty at various times of the collapses, and some of the families, and basically do some digging around really, and just to see if we could work out what was going on. It was difficult when you were taking statements off the parents because we were going into so much detail, and to see the effect it had on them was shocking. But as police officers, I have to say that we're not trained to do this, but you have to somehow distance yourself to a certain degree from these events, because if you didn't, I don't think you'd be able to investigate what had happened properly.
Dr. Hull's report came some 4 days later. He didn't consider that anything was worthy of further investigation in 10 of the 13. 2 were worthy of further investigation, but he felt that there would be a medical explanation for those.
Of the 3 cases Dr. Hull highlighted, there was one case that stood out to the detectives, that of infant Paul Crampton, who collapsed suddenly 3 times in March 1991, but then made a miraculous recovery.
In the case of Paul Crampton, who was a 5-month-old child who had a raised insulin level, he felt that there was something worthy of further investigation, but again, he felt that there may be some bodily function that had gone wrong that was as yet undiscovered. There was certainly some pressure from within the police service to close down the inquiry, but I took the view that we couldn't close down an inquiry that we weren't sure about. So I decided that I would set my team of officers to work on the Paul Crampton case.
When Paul was taken to hospital, it was made very clear this was for just a precautionary measure. Paul was not an ill child. He was being taken into hospital because he had this wheeze. So yes, of course we were concerned as parents, but not worried.
I was handed over his care for the weekend, and he had come with some breathing difficulties and possible chest infection, and he had treated for suspect asthma. On Saturday, I did the ward round, and the parents were happy with him.
I had dropped my wife off at hospital, took the 2 children, Paul's brother and sister, shopping to a local supermarket to buy some things we needed for home. When I walked back into the hospital, I walked into a scene of Paul laying in the arms of a nurse on her lap. He was cold, he was clammy, he was sweaty, he was clearly in some distressed condition.
I came as an emergency, and then I found the junior doctors and the local crash team tried to put up a drip, but they had failed. Eventually, I managed to set up a drip and check the blood immediately, and it did show low blood sugar. So I gave some glucose, and within few hours, he slowly recovered. And I was very pleased because I had the fear, because I did not know why he had low sugar, and 2, why he collapsed when he was otherwise well.
We were told he was coming out of hospital the very next day, so that would have been on the Sunday. So to go from, yeah, he's coming home, everything's fine, to a scene of a child being clearly very ill and very distressed was clearly very distressing for us as parents.
The following evening, 5-month-old Paul Crampton collapsed again due to low blood sugar levels. Once more, Dr. Nana Yakara treated him with glucose.
My thoughts were once again, this is most likely medical, but if he remains stable, Low sugar in 5-month-old babies is rare but not uncommon, and there are lots of medical reasons to account for it. He settled, and all the observations, half-hourly, quarter-hourly observations carried out by the nurses were satisfactory.
3 days later, Paul Crampton made a full recovery. Doctors couldn't find any medical reason for his sudden hypoglycemic collapses and prepared to discharge him from hospital.
And then he had a third hypoglycemic attack on the Thursday. And at that point, he was transferred as an emergency to Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham. Again, traumatic, a child that had gone from being well to ill very quickly.
Queen's Medical Centre kept him. They carried out various tests but did not identify any specific reason for any suspicion. So much so, they discharged that child back to the GP.
I took these facts to Professor Hull and I asked what his conclusions were in relation to this. He supported the view that perhaps it was a bodily malfunction that had now corrected itself and the boy had recovered spontaneously. Nevertheless, I tasked DI Neil Jones with the job of trying to find a second blood sample. Neil Jones managed to find a blood sample which was taken on this third collapse in a refrigerator at Boston's Pilgrim Hospital. We had found a world-renowned expert in insulin. A couple of days later, he telephoned me with his results, and he astounded me. He said, "This is not bodily produced insulin, it's injected insulin."
The expert had detected more than 30 times the normal level of insulin in baby Paul Crampton's blood.
So for the very first time, we now have an inkling that something really untoward is going on at Grantham Hospital. I felt that I couldn't let go of this until I was quite sure that we hadn't got a murderer on the ward.
In April 1991, Lincolnshire police made a breakthrough in their investigation of the suspicious deaths of 4 children and the collapses of 9 others in Kesteven Hospital in Grantham. The insulin levels detected in the blood of 5-month-old baby Paul Crampton convinced police that someone had injected him.
The people that are able to inject that insulin into him quite easily are nurses and parents. They're the people that are going to be spending time around the bed.
So on one hand, there's horror to think that someone could have tried to harm our child. But on the other hand, there's a relief that, well, actually, this now means our child hasn't got a long-term health problem. Someone gave him drugs inappropriately. So there was a mixed set of emotions there.
So that the first thing that you have to do is to eliminate those people that may be suspect, and David Crampton became one of those people.
I was there, Kath was there. I didn't think that we'd be a suspect for very long. Having said that, of course, there are cases of miscarriage of justice, and so that's on your mind.
The Cramptons were quickly eliminated as potential suspects in their son's case, and Stuart began to focus the police investigation on the hospital staff.
All the nurses, all the doctors who were in the ward were prime suspects. So in addition to our having to look after the patients, be on call, the police used to come and we had to go through every case, explaining every word, technical word in particular, explaining for hours and hours and getting our statements. So that was quite a difficult time.
The incident room were tasked with producing a chart of staff working against collapses of children. Sounds relatively easy. Like all duty rosters, what actually happens on the ground is not necessarily what appears on the paper. So we then had to set about looking at what actually did occur on the ground. we had to get permission from parents to release the hospital files. And that didn't turn out to be particularly easy. Of the 13 children at Grantham Hospital that we subsequently dealt with, 4 had died and 9 had been successfully resuscitated, some of them on a number of occasions. The parents were extremely grateful to the doctors and the hospital for the recovery of their children.
The families were looking and trying to protect the nursing staff and the doctor staff on the wards, and we were trying to poke in there, and if you like, with a stick, which they didn't like.
They were cooperative, the families, but I think it's fair to say that they found it difficult to understand why police officers were going to the ward, going to the houses, you know, to talk to them about what had happened to the children.
Nevertheless, we pursued this line. We got permission from the parents and we got hold of both nursing notes and the doctor's notes.
The team began with the medical notes for 5-month-old Paul Crampton, who they knew had been injected with insulin.
I set the team to work to find out what type of insulin it could be that had been injected. We quickly learnt that there was no way of establishing the type of insulin. But what did come out was that insulin in the hospital is allocated to wards, it's kept in locked fridges, and 3 days before the first of the collapses at Grantham Hospital, the key to the refrigerator on the children's ward, Ward 4, had gone missing. The last person to have it was Nurse Allitt, who said that she had given it to another nurse, but the hospital had carried out no inquiry at all to establish whether that was true or not.
Investigators also found something surprising in baby Paul Crampton's nursing notes.
Nurse Allitt suggested that they ought to do a BM stick test. Now, BM stick test is a test for measuring insulin in the blood. The other nurse was quite surprised at this because there was no suggestion that this boy had been given insulin. On the very next day, on the Sunday, Allitt went to take down the drip and the child once more went into a hyperglycemic attack. He's hooked up again to the glucose and recovers.
It was concerning that this particular name kept coming up, Beverley Allitt. Could she be doing anything?
So on the 21st of May of 1991, Beverley Allitt was arrested.
News of her arrest quickly spread to the hospital, the parents of the children, and the outside world.
The police are accusing a nurse of attacking and killing the children. Then you get the shock. How could that be true? And you get people in the town saying it can't be true. The police have screwed up. They're wrong. You get people aggressively defending her.
No pediatrician would ever have dared to think that a nurse or a doctor is amongst you as a killer, looking after the patient who is under your care.
22-year-old nurse Beverley Allitt was cautioned and interviewed about the collapse of Paul Crampton. All her interviews were recorded.
Okay. Before we say anything else to you, though, I must tell you do not have to say anything unless you wish to do so, but what you say may be given in evidence. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
What happened to Paul Crampton to make him have his attack?
I don't know.
Nobody else?
No.
And this is the very points that push it towards you.
She tried to bamboozle us, really, with stuff that she was saying, because we were trying our best to, particularly in relation to Paul Crampton, to talk about the insulin and the effects it had on the body and all that, but we weren't medically trained, and I think she could easily pick up on this, and on reflection tried to push us away from the actual direct questioning.
How was he given the insulin? I don't know. Was he given it via drip or into his body himself or what?
Well, we've yet that to establish.
From given drugs, you get the same effect if you injected or put through the drip?
I don't know. I haven't a clue. I never do it. I'm not allowed to.
Have you ever given an intravenous injection to anyone?
No, never. I wasn't there.
I'm an old-fashioned copper, and I believed that somebody of 21, 22 years of age brought into police custody for the first time would quite quickly tell us what they'd done. I couldn't have been further from the truth. She was quite the opposite.
You were in the room on your own, an opportunity.
What am I doing then?
I don't know. What are you doing?
What have I got? Have I got something in my flipping hand or something to give him?
I don't know.
I just can't get my point through. I'm really going to give a harmful drug to a tiny little helpless baby.
She tried to push the blame towards other people who were present. She never once admitted that she'd got access to drugs. So here we are, 8 people who've got access to drugs. And you have got added advantages, as we see it, if you like, in the fact that this key's gone missing, that you've had accidents, insulin. You don't have to have it then. You said yourself you wouldn't cart the insulin about.
You are in a position to gain access to that insulin at the time you are the key holder.
There's a lot of people access to...
I'm not saying there isn't. What I'm talking about is you, and you're one of those persons who has access to that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, I do.
What made this investigation so tough was the fact that we had no witnesses to any of these events. We had the suspicions of who was present at the time, but there was no admissions whatsoever from Beverley Allitt.
There is a limited time that you can keep people in custody even for serious offences. And so she was released on police bail.
Stuart was under a lot of pressure to close down that inquiry. And I do know that a senior officer said to him, Stuart, you're chasing rainbows. You need to give this up.
There was a lot of pressure. I was never fearful for losing my job as a police officer, but I was fearful at one stage of losing my job as the detective superintendent. But nevertheless, I decided that I couldn't live with myself without following it through. I was extremely worried that if she was allowed back into a hospital environment, then the likelihood is that we would have more deaths.
On the 24th of May 1991, 22-year-old newly qualified nurse Beverley Allitt was released from police custody on bail after 2 days of questioning.
I was quite convinced, even from that very early stage, that we had got the right person. The hospital were reticent to suspend her from work, but I pointed out that if she returned to work and there were more collapses, that the hospital were going to be in a dire situation. So it was then agreed that she would be suspended until the investigation was complete.
As a police officer, the most frustrating thing is lack of evidence, when in your mind you know that the person is guilty and you just haven't got the evidence there to prove it.
The only evidence that we then collected was the evidence in relation to Paul Crampton. We then had to set about looking at the circumstances of the collapses of all the other children, and I knew that that was going to take a considerable amount of time. I then set about splitting my team up into pairs, and each pair were allocated a child that had collapsed or died. Now you have to bear in mind the difficulties that this would create. Grantham Hospital Children's Ward had very minimal staffing, so the same nurse would probably at some stage be involved in the care of each and every child, so they would in effect be seen 13 times. This created union problems, but nevertheless we stood firm and decided that this was the way that we would do it.
So the nurses were very worried, and we did not hear anything, no backup support, no counselling, no extra support. We were a small hospital, cozy little family, which we were so friendly and working together. We had lots of strains, everybody suspecting the other, not telling anything, not talking, so that really was upsetting.
No one person could investigate this sort of thing. Not everybody is able to live with the fact that they're investigating the deaths of children. And we sort of did what we could to support those people that were suffering in that way. But at the end of the day, you have to get on with the investigation as well.
You can't take it home because you'd never sleep. You've got to be able to deal with it as a case, but it always is going to be more difficult with children.
During this whole process, we contacted the coroner. Now, the coroner also raised his concerns about the number of children. There had been 4 deaths in this same time period, which was 59 days from start to finish. Liam Taylor, Timothy Hardwick, who was an 11-year-old in a special school, he suffered fits. Becky Phillips was the 3rd. And the last one was a 15-month-old pretty little girl called Claire Peck. He asked us to look at the circumstances surrounding the deaths of the 4 children.
Stuart Clifton allocated me the job of getting the medical files, try and go through them to see if anything was obvious, and we obviously didn't have any medical training. And secondly, to see if I could get any samples, be that blood, organs, tissue, to look at the other cases. The first baby that came onto the ward was Liam Taylor. His death had been put down to a cot death. When I looked in the files, he'd actually had a heart attack, so that was unusual to start with.
I was very, very surprised, to say the least. A 7-week-old baby who did not have any cardiac problems and no family history of any cardiac problem.
At the time of Liam Taylor's death, Dr. Nani Yakara questioned the outcome of the coroner's report, but his request for a second post-mortem examination was refused.
I got a reply, "Do not worry, babies can die inexplicably, and if the coroner has carried out a post-mortem through a pathologist, please accept that. Don't worry too much."
When Stuart's team re-examined the files, they discovered one crucial factor in Liam's death.
We've got Beverley Allitt at the centre of an event, and she is alone when this child collapses.
11 days after Liam's death, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, a boy suffering from cerebral palsy and epilepsy, collapsed and died within hours of being admitted to Ward 4. His death was followed by that of 2-month-old baby twin girl, Becky Phillips, on the 1st of April.
A little twin, Becky Phillips, is an interesting case because she was released from the hospital and then suddenly the child became floppy. The parents grabbed the child, drove to Grantham Hospital, arriving at about 3 in the morning, and the child is dead upon arrival.
I told the parents, from the information I got, it's very likely this is what we call a cot death. Then I said I have no choice but to inform the coroner, which I did.
After Becky's death, Dr. Nani Yakara became concerned for her twin sister, Katie.
As a direct result, the twin is brought into hospital 4:45 that same morning.
Becky's twin, Katie, then suffered 2 unexplained near-fatal collapses. She was resuscitated by Dr. Nani Yakara, but was left brain-damaged.
The team from Nottingham did detailed investigations, especially because one twin had died, but none of them could find any positive clinical evidence as to the reason.
What we discovered was that Allitt is allocated this child's care on a 1-to-1 basis. On the last of the collapses, Beverley Allitt is seen holding this child, nursing the child in effect.
Allitt had built up trust with the twins' parents and was even asked to be Katie's godparent. 3 weeks after the collapse of Katie Phillips, another child on Ward 4 died, 15-month-old Claire Peck. Police then examined notes for all 13 suspicious cases, and discovered that Allitt had also been alone with every child prior to or during their collapses.
What we haven't got is medical evidence that says that these children have been murdered.
We knew that it got to be Beverley because there was nobody else who could have been there to do it. But it was complex in proving that she was responsible. Gathering of evidence was extremely difficult. I'd come in contact with a chap who was a radiographer at the Queen's Medical Centre. And I'd got 4 or 5 of the x-rays from these children with me. And he had a quick look at the files. The one that he looked at was Katie Phillips. The radiographer could see that she had 5 broken ribs and she'd actually been squashed and held until she stopped breathing. Here you have a defenceless child that is needing medical treatment by an attack by somebody they can do nothing about. You're going to do medical examinations and post-mortem examinations with children. It's always much more difficult and emotionally involved. I attended the City Hospital at Nottingham. And while I was there, I was told that there was bloods retained from a lot of children in the City Hospital. And when a child is in hospital, they have blood taken. And I ended up with this chest freezer, and in there I recovered blood from 9 of the children. I brought that back to Grantham. They came back and we found that Becky Phillips had been injected with insulin. Claire Peck had been injected with potassium. Somebody else had been injected with lignocaine, which is an anaesthetic. And these 9 samples of blood obviously became a crucial part of the inquiry.
The police now had enough evidence to bring Beverley in for questioning again, this time in connection with the child deaths.
Sir David Hull has by now gone back to re-examining the files with the new evidence, and we decide that we will rearrest Beverley Allitt and put the new facts to her.
She'd changed her stance, and instead of chatting and trying to muddle the truth, for want of a better term, she took the stance of she was making no comment.
You were arrested for Becky Grace Phillips on suspicion of her murder this morning at your home. Were you nominated to be the godmother to Becky's twin sister, Katie?
No.
Did you give her insulin?
No.
Did you intend to kill the child?
No.
Having interviewed Beverley Allitt for a second time, she was again released on police bail. The families engaged a Manchester-based solicitor to act on their behalf and began to apply pressure to us, to the police, saying that we weren't getting on with things fast enough. The solicitor wrote and said that they would take out their own prosecution if we didn't hurry up. So I decided that I would have a conference of all of the doctors, and this was held in June of 1991, when I presented all of the now known facts to all those present. There was a dawning realisation that they'd got it wrong in the first place. By the time we get to October of 1991, we're in a position now with the medical evidence to charge her. Obviously, being here, the road is busier now than it was 25 years ago, but having said that, you know, the hospital remains pretty much the same. And obviously, I can recall, like yesterday, the events that led up to the arrest of Beverley Allitt. So an inquiry of that type remains pretty fresh in your mind.
In October 1991, investigators finally had enough evidence to arrest and charge 22-year-old Beverley Allitt with 4 counts of murder and 8 counts of attempted murder of children at Grantham Hospital.
We are now arresting you for the attempted murder of Paul Crampton. This child has been given a deliberate injection of insulin from which he could have died. I believe you gave it to him.
No, sir.
In fact, this child has been given 3 injections of insulin on each occasion, and on each date was alone with him shortly before he suffered his hypoglycemic attacks. Yet again, this is not a coincidence, is it?
No reply.
She's placed in a police cell. I have to remember that this is a girl that's about 21 years of age, never been in trouble with the police. She gets all of these charges. She's laughing. She's happy about them.
Are you smiling? Is it funny? Is it light-hearted? Don't you take the interview serious?
No.
I don't think it's funny. I'm sure there's 12 sets of parents down. Parents who were prepared to offer you the responsibility to be godmother to their children. Parents of children you murdered.
Have you got any feelings for them at all?
No plan.
It does take over your life. And yes, there are times when you go to bed at night and collapse because you're tired, and then you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and the events of the day are going through your mind. And so yes, there is a knock-on effect, and it'd be silly to say that there wasn't.
She was an evil, callous, calculating person. She knew what she was doing, particularly when she's injecting vast amounts of potassium, lignocaine, into little babies. They're defenceless children who rely on her, and she's attacking them, and there's nobody to stop her.
We then didn't see any more of her until February of 1993, when the trial opened at Nottingham Crown Court.
She was kept in custody at Grantham Police Station and taken to court the next morning. I was on duty the next morning and went down to the cell because I was going to accompany her to court. I was shocked that someone could do all these things and, you know, not feel any remorse whatsoever. But not only was there no remorse, it was the smiles, the shrugging of the shoulders. She was leaning forward, looking out the van at the people and that had gathered around the court, as if she was looking forward to appearing there.
Beverley Allitt stood trial for 4 counts of murder, 11 counts of attempted murder, and 11 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. She pleaded not guilty to all charges.
I virtually gave evidence on a daily basis along with my colleague. Nurses were also called, and we gave evidence for nearly 3 months. The papers were highlighting Grantham nurse killed patients, and every time Beverley Allitt's picture was put on the papers, who was with her? The 2 consultant pediatricians. So that wasn't terribly nice.
There were many families in that courtroom on that final day, and there were nurses that had gone that weren't necessarily giving evidence, but had gone because they wanted to see the end result of the investigation. And they were quite emotional as well, as you can imagine, because some of those, even after the event, felt that they'd failed the families because they hadn't been able to prevent it. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. The trial lasted about 3 months. The jury found her guilty of 4 murders and 9 accounts of causing grievous bodily harm with intent.
The first time that the foreman of that jury said the word guilty, there were parents gasping with a very strange mixture of emotion. I looked across and there was the Detective Superintendent, Stuart Clifton. He had his hand on his face and he was crying too. So it was pretty powerful. I think it was this very odd combination of relief but grief too. It's just, whoa, how can you believe that that would have happened?
There's always a sense of relief, I think, at the end, but in this one in particular, there were parents that were quite emotional, and it's very difficult not to get caught up in the emotion of the event, and both me and members of my team certainly felt the emotion of the day. Before sentencing, James Hunt, who was the defending barrister, raised the presumption that she was suffering from Munchausen by proxy.
Munchausen syndrome by proxy is another condition which is usually due to carers creating fabricated illnesses on the children who they look after.
Whilst Munchausen syndrome may well be an explanation for crime, it's not a reason for crime. The judge in his wisdom sentenced her to 13 life sentences. She was transferred into Rampton Secure Mental Hospital, where I saw her around about the back end of 1993. She was prepared to make admissions in respect of 9 of the 13 convictions, but she wouldn't give any explanation as to motive. Being a cynical ex-policeman, I think it may well have something to do with the fact that she's trying to get back into mainstream prison so that she could then apply for parole.
It was the first nurse to be convicted in the UK of murders and attacks on these children. As I'm sure any other normal person would say, that it's horrendous. It's horrendous for a police officer's point of view, that someone could go on there and do all this. So for a parent and members of the public, I mean, it's just devastating, unbelievable.
The effect of this whole case on our family has to be put in the context of Paul. Paul is well. He's suffered no lasting harm. In fact, he's just got married. So he's, his life, he's got a career. How would we feel if if Paul had been harmed or, God forbid, had died as a result of this? Who knows? I can't say. So we can look at this in a different way totally, and we can put this in a little box as part of life's rich tapestry and move on with the rest of our lives. You know, this is a tragic event, but it was not going to affect the rest of our lives.
I feel so sad that somebody like Beverley Allitt has taken to a noble profession like nursing and then has done this much damage for all parents, families, and all the others in the community setting. So to me, I believe she is a criminal, cold-blooded murderer.
After Beverley Allitt's convictions, Grantham Hospital changed the name of Ward 4 to Kingfisher Ward, and 2 of its consultants were removed.
The hospital staff, these hard-working, caring, dedicated people who are there to make people better, were the victims of Beverley Allitt, exactly the same as the families. They were under suspicion, and some of them suffered in their careers very badly as a result of what Allitt did. In my opinion, some quite unfairly, because these were people there trying to do a good job. Beverley Allitt committed a crime against those as well as she did against the families and the children involved.
Of the 9 children that recovered, 2 suffered long-lasting effects. An independent inquiry carried out in 1993 identified and criticised failures within the hospital, but claimed that the ultimate responsibility for what happened rested with Allitt herself.
I'll never forget these children's faces, and that is always going to be a memory. And I'm pleased that it ended up as it did.
I find it traumatic because I'm just plodding through to find a result. And it's not until you sit back and look at what it is that you've investigated that you're able to say, well, yeah, that was pretty gruesome.